Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is Colin Snell. Welcome back to the 21st Talks podcast. I have a question for you guys at the offset of today's episode. Where do you think change comes from? Do you think change comes from some sustained grassroots movement? Do you think it's a top-down political issue of if we just had the right politicians, that's how sustainable change would happen? Or is it a philosophical origin? Is it a psychological origin? Does it start by looking at the threats and the anxieties of that lay hidden in people's minds at large? Where does it start? And that's a question that really helps to interpret the deluge of ideas in conversation that you're about to hear if you listen to today's episode. Dickson Despommier is my first repeating guest. He was on for episode 4, and we talked about vertical farming, his TED Talks, his books, his ideas that he's cultivated from an academic career that he spent most of at Columbia University in their public health department and their medical school, and has now taken to Fordham University as a public health professor there. He's a man who cares about people's well-being, not just their physical, but also their mental, because he recognizes there's a connection between society and who we become. So a lot of today's episode is about the interconnectedness of the world, of you and of me, and of the things that we try to do. And I also talk about the meaning-oriented communities idea that I'll be presenting next week for my first lecture. I'm really excited, but there can be more information found about that in the link down below. I am incredibly excited to get this week's episode out to you guys. Dickson Despommier is a incredible academic and thinker, and he is passionate, not just about fly fishing, but he does love fly fishing, but he's passionate about figuring out ideas that can actually help people in an equitable way and sustainably. He is a perfect encapsulation of what good public health is today in our country, especially at a time of such increased virus. He also is a team member and common guest on This Week in Virology, which is a podcast about viruses, and that where they take a bunch of public health and virus experts from around the country and sometimes around the world, and they talk about what has been happening in their field. And it's blown up recently due to COVID-19 and just because of high production value. They are getting close to, I believe, 6 million views on their YouTube channel. It's absolutely insane how well they're doing over there, and I cannot wait to see if we can reach similar numbers. So if you want to support us in this mission and in this quest to have more conversations about the 21st century, the forces, people, and ideas that define the century and your experience in it, and giving context to your experience of the 21st century and what you can do and have a bigger part in, then follow, like, and subscribe down below on whatever platform you're listening to this to. It really helps the podcast out. My name is once again Colin Snell, and without any further ado, here is my second conversation with Dickson Despommier of Columbia University and Fordham University. Thank you guys very much. I'll see you guys next week. What are the forces, challenges, and ideas that define the 21st century? Conversations to understand the greatest figures and stories of today to create a better tomorrow. This is the 21st Talks podcast.
Infections, all right, not cases, just infections, it's in the millions. If you look at the number of deaths, it's in the hundreds of thousands. So when you do the math and you say, out of how many thousand infections do people die, it's less than 1%. So who's afraid of that? I'll tell you who's afraid of it. If you're an older black male and you've got a heart condition, you're going to die from this. If you're a Native American, you're going to die from this. If you don't have privilege and you don't get the antibody injection from Regeneron, you're going to die from this. So it depends on. It's still about inequality. It's still about poverty. It's still about disadvantaged. And you and I mean, I don't think I would die from this, even though I'm a little bit overweight. But I'm a white male with no underlying health conditions. And so, and you're a young whippersnapper, unless you know that you've got something wrong, like a heart valve or something like that, that's given you problems since birth, it's probable that you're going to be fine. And the other thing that's really maddening about it is that 30 to 40% of the people who actually catch it never knew they had it.
Yeah, and I think that's the really scary thing as a young
It's
person.
very scary.
Yeah, it's really terrifying.
You're right.
And,
And because
and
you can go to the supermarket for a dozen eggs and come back and die.
yeah, absolutely. And then beyond that, you're getting it from people potentially speaking as we enter this sort of, and I would really love to hear your take on Thanksgiving and the 40% of
You're
Americans
going
who
to
are
get it. Trust me, you're going to get it.
people. Yeah, there's gonna be such a massive surge 2 weeks, 7 to 14 days after Thanksgiving. Like I would love to hear your take on it. Also, I'd like to point out the interview's already started. So I'm joined with
Fine.
Dickson Despommier from Fordham University, who also worked public health department at Columbia for, is it 20 years, 25 years? How long do you work at
Well, I
Columbia?
started in 1971, but who's counting?
I-
No, I'm okay with whenever you want to start. If you could add a few more years to my life, that would be nice.
Okay, great. So I'm here at Dickson Despommier. He started working at Columbia in 1895, and
There you
he is
go.
currently. But yeah, I would love to like directly get into it. Although we've already kind of started. I
Oh,
would
it's
love to
fine.
hear your take
Fine.
on what you think is going to what we're going to see after Thanksgiving because of everyone traveling. Because I've seen some estimates are like, I mean, in my county, in Pierce County, in Washington State, if you
Right.
have 10 people who come to a Thanksgiving, statistically, there's a 1 in 10 chance that one of
This is
those
true.
people.
You got a 10% infection rate. You are absolutely right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So what are you like?
It's
Are you
crazy.
just pessimistic at this point? Are you like terrified of what's going to happen, or is it not really terror? Is it just sort of like sobering realism?
You know, if you go back and read the plague years with Jonathan Swift,
Such a yeah, absolutely.
people, they went out to eat. They had parties. They pretended or they got used to the fact. I think more of it's got used to the fact
Mm,
that there's going to be plague and that people will die from this. But if I die, I die, but I'm still going to live a normal life. And the
mm,
fact is that without the germ theory to help them along as to what was causing the plague, they had to behave as though they were not going to be infected by it. And so they did. London just went about its business. They didn't bother collecting the trash, controlling rats, looking to see if fleas could transmit it or anything. They just went about their business and they died like flies.
mm.
And the little children's poem, Ring Around the Rosie,
Mm-hmm.
Pocket full of posy, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. That was what was happening all around London. And in the countryside also, by the way. So it was a little bit different for smallpox because smallpox was almost at the edge of knowing what causes these things
Mm-hmm.
in the 1700s. So Jenner made the wonderful observation that milkmaids didn't catch this.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that point on, Pasteur and other people and Koch, and that's my field. So I mean, that's I'm cavelling, as the Jews would say, the Jewish people of the world would say, I'm cavelling right now because I understand what's going on. I'm also crying because I understand what's going on. So Thanksgiving, if people could get themselves tested
Mm.
and then sit tight for a couple of days because the results will take that long to come in,
Mm-hmm.
and if they can actually show that without going up to 37 cycles on the PCR test, that you were positive or negative, then you're free to move about the cabin, so to speak. And as long as you stay within your home, and as long as you stay with people that were also tested, that's the way to go. And
Yeah,
so I think
absolutely.
that families that actually wanted that to happen said, look, we're all going to go get tested, and
Mm-hmm.
then we're going to sit tight, and we're going to have our Thanksgiving at home.
Yeah, it sounds like though that a lot of that dialogue as like that's what should happen. I know Dr. Fauci has said that the quarantine
Yeah,
show started, and
I
that
know
sort of thing.
pretty
But
well, actually.
what? Sorry, what's that?
I know him pretty well. He's been on one of our several of our podcasts.
Really? I did not realize that.
Yeah, and Peter Hotez is a good friend of mine because we've written a book together. So, he's on CNN News all the time. In fact, he was on last night. And he gives the same, I'm giving you their take on this. So I'll be their conduit
Okay.
for the
Until we can have them on.
Well, no, why not?
No, genuinely. Yeah, I would love to
Why
have them
not?
on.
They are not unavailable. These people want to get the word out to as many as possible. And if your podcast can help out along, they'll be willing to do it. I can tell you right now, they will.
Wow.
So the ultimate take on this is there are people out there that will believe that black is white. The shirt you're wearing is black. That's because I said so, not because it's white or black. I can tell you what color that is and you will believe me, because you don't want to disbelieve anything else that I'm saying. Because what else I'm saying is that the Democrats are bad people. These people are bad, those people are bad. And I'm telling you that because I'm the world's authority on this. And besides, I know better than you because I've got more money than you do. I've lived longer than you. I've got, and you go on and on and on about these things. And pretty soon people are willing to hand over their lives to those people. And I'm not a theist, and I'm gonna rile a lot of feathers on this, I'm afraid, because if you look in the background of my shot here, this is a fly tying desk. So I'm busy preparing for next season, assuming I'll be alive.
Back to fly fishing. I love it.
No, it's of course. So there are books on fly fishing, and in fact, there are about 5,000 different books on fly fishing. That's incredible, isn't it? But there's only one Bible, basically. There's only one King James version. There's only one this. So if you read 5,000 books on fly fishing, you're going to end up with 5,000 different opinions as to why flies work. If you read the Bible, you don't have to read 5,000 books on anything. You just read one book, and that book says, here's the way you should conduct your life. Now, I'm not knocking the Bible at all because I think it's a handbook as to how to behave. And most of the advice given throughout the Bible is valid, and a lot of it relates to the way we treat other people. So what I'm really confused about is how a theist, a true dyed-in-the-wool person who believes in a hereafter and in a God and all these other things that are espoused in the Bible, how can they reject the part in the Bible that says that we should treat everyone equal, and we should help the poor, and we should sacrifice our own lives for those that need things that we already have? Why is that not the case for as many people as walk around the streets without a mask? Because if you walk around without a mask, you're sending a message to everybody else. You're saying, I do not care what happens to you. It's not about me, it's about you. But they don't think of that. They think of themselves. They say, I'm not going to wear a mask because somebody told me I didn't need to wear a mask, because they refuse to wear a mask, because if you do, you'll be identified as a certain political party member.
Yeah.
And that, Joe Biden has a big job ahead of him to dispel that concept, because if you can't get people on board for public health, this has nothing to do with politics. Zero.
Absolutely.
And we all know this. So you're asking me for my take on this, and my take is that how do you convince someone that white is white and it's not black when someone else told you already that it was black, and you believe everything else they say, including that there's an enormous conspiracy out there that subverted about 6.5 million votes in this country, which to my mind is absolute ludicrousness, and it's a sign of mental illness.
There's so many different ways.
It starts at the top of that chain, and it works its way down to the believers. And there's a series that's going to come on TV about a week from now, I think, and it's all about the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. And the point they make is that 4 years before that happened, people voted in a democratic election.
Yeah, well, there's this trend in history of disasters either being manufactured or leveraged, like real ones being leveraged to limit access to rights. I think something that's really concerning for me, because this last week I attended the Cambridge's conference on catastrophic risk for 2020. And there is a strong division there where there's this assumption that, okay, we're going to have all these technologies, you know, these bio threats, as well as stronger capabilities of AI and these other things that like one bad actor or a group of technically specified bad actors could have a serious impact, right? We already know that from the Tokyo bombings in the 90s, that a religious sect of people can create and dispel,
Right.
just in their case, not very effectively, like a dangerous agent, and it's getting easier and easier. And I think that
You are quite
there's
right.
this awareness that our sense of rights and liberty, and specifically if we're using political terminology, civil rights specifically, are at times going to come in conflict with our ability to actually protect ourselves. So there's that question there that's widely accepted in global risk. And then also the historical account of totalitarianism, right? Which also is a major, major threat to people everywhere.
No question.
That is like, it's like totalitarianism can't be the solution to these global risks, right?
Right.
But then also it's like, then like, what is going to be the solution to these things? So there's this really big
Yeah,
issue
I don't
right
think there's
now
one
where it's like,
solution.
yeah, we don't really have a way of going through it for synthesizing different approaches and different opinions on it. Because right now the camps are like hard set. It's like, well, we're gonna have to
True.
limit rights, increase surveillance, and then the other side of folks are just like, no, it's like, we can't do that. And I think that part of the discussion right now is alienated because most of the people who are having that discussion to any extent right now are having a very shitty version of it. Pardon the French, but a very
Oh,
crappy
you're
version
right.
of it,
You're absolutely right.
because they're the ones that you're talking about, the ones who have been swayed by disinformation. You know, so instead of them being like, well, like, let's look at how disasters historically can be leveraged to minimize liberties and rise totalitarianism, they're supporting a fascist, right? Like they're supporting a totalitarian, and then
Right.
like they're claiming that somehow wearing masks is that thing when it
Right.
isn't. You know, it's a public health measure, and I think that is the part of it that is.
So you notice now they're not calling it a mask.
What are they calling it?
They're calling it a face covering.
Ooh, like as in the public health folks, or
That's right.
ooh,
No,
that's
public
clever.
health folks, because they don't want you
Yeah.
to think that you're trying to hide something. I mean, the only time I would think about putting on a mask is if I was going to hold up a 7-Eleven, you know, but I've never done that, but I've never even thought about it. But if it was, I would put a mask on, right? So if it was Halloween, I would put a mask on. If it was Mardi Gras, I would put a mask on.
But a face
And if I didn't want people to see my face, I would put a mask on. So God damn it, I have a right to see your face. But you don't if this is the way to prevent the spread of a disease. So
exactly. So it's how do we like?
So somehow we have to make transparent masks that still are effective.
Oh, that's an interesting solution.
If you did that, I can guarantee you that everybody would be wearing them. So I actually wrote an essay, which I'm tempted to read on your program, called "The Emperor's." We'll get to that later, but you know, I'm hypercritical at some level, and I'm totally understanding about human nature at another level. You know, you told us it was going to last 6 months. God damn it, it didn't last 6 months at all. You were wrong.
And now
why should I believe anything else you're telling me now?
Yeah.
You know, the good people out there, Tony Fauci's of the world, the Peter Hotez's of the world, those people didn't say how long this was going to last. They never made that estimate because they had no idea. They've never seen anything like this before. And they tell you that up front. We've never seen this before. In 100 years, even the flu epidemic did not behave this way. It was not as universal. In fact, I don't know if you realize, but you might, of course, if you've read anything about this, the influenza outbreak of 1918, they call it the Spanish flu, which is horrible to do because you're denigrating the Spanish.
Yeah,
didn't originate in Spain at all. The age group that was singled out by this virus.
It was 18
not
to
the
like
young, it was not
30.
the old, it was your age group.
Yeah, which is, and it was the people coming back from war as well,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So it was like
a lot of
this.
them didn't want to come home. They knew when they did, they would die, and they came home and they died. So you've got a totally different situation now here where everybody gets infected and only 70% gets sick and only 2% gets really sick and only 0.1% die. Okay, so that sounds to me like, I'm a tropical disease person by training, so that sounds like every year's malaria outbreak. I'm not joking. Everybody that lives in a malaria zone gets malaria once a year. Everybody.
I had no idea.
Children, teenagers, adults, old people.
And most often it's asymptomatic.
They all get it. They all get it. No, they're not all asymptomatic. The people that have never had it before, if they're over the age of 6 months and they catch it and the maternal antibodies are gone, they die. So every year in the world, get this one now, every year in the world, 3 to 5 million people die from malaria. 3 to 5 million people. We're not even close to that yet with this virus. I don't know what the death rate is totally for the whole world, but the point is that
it passed 1 million a month ago.
But you know what? These are little black children that nobody cares about. They live in Africa. Who cares? They have 10 children, 3 survive. That's the way they live their lives. I'm not going to live mine like that. That's the attitude. And that's the reason why it took so long to get WHO and United States Department of Health and the NGOs of the world to gather around it. What's happening there is going to be happening here. It's not necessarily the result of the death of those children from malaria that's going to affect you. It's the lack of those people that's going to affect you.
Yeah.
Some of those people were geniuses. They would have grown up to solve the problem of hydrogen-powered vehicles, or they could have invented time travel. They could have invented all kinds of things that we wanted, but guess what? They're dead.
Because we didn't have the humanity to take care of fellow folks, right? Which I think is
you're right. We don't value the breadth and depth of our DNA.
Yeah,
that's what we don't value. We value our own, of course.
Yeah,
we value our families, of course.
That's inbuilt. Yeah.
But then after that, it starts to get fuzzy, and by the time you get out to, well, I'm German and I really hate the Spanish. Why should I care about their DNA? That's a problem of history and territorialism and wealth and privilege. Yeah. And whether you have enough to eat, or whether you live in a nice house, or whether you can have 20 wives, or whether you end up in jail and you don't have any future at all. All of this, it's so global that it's hard to pinpoint.
Which there's so many different ways we can take this. I think later on we'll definitely want to circle back to the question of culture and how it affects interpretation disease. I think I have some interesting questions there for you. But at this point, I think something I would love to hear your take on is one of my favorite things to say about global risk right now is not necessarily will we survive this century, although that is a big question in and of itself. It's the bigger question of will we survive with our humanity intact, right? If the people who survive are just the thin top, maybe 5% of the population wealth-wise, and they're the ones who happen to get the resources to actually survive, that is what's looking most likely, right? However, that's not a solution, because we're still leaving the bottom 95. We're leaving all the working class, in addition to the working class, all of the poverty-stricken people around the globe. And it's not a human solution to this thing. It's not humane in any capacity. And beyond humane, because that's a term that I feel like is loaded and kind of distasteful sometimes, it is not respecting of people's autonomy and right to life. And I think that is the thing that is deeply infuriating for me, is this isolationism that so much of the world has right now in our nation state bodies, where we're like, oh yeah, we'll see after American ideas and American first. I think it kind of like was really exacerbated by Donald Trump, of course, but there's
not
still
the only one to say that, though. He was not the only one to say that.
Oh, absolutely not. No.
That was the whole deal,
Yeah, absolutely.
Close the door. Nobody comes in. It's just about us.
Yeah, which I mean, we saw it before we entered World War I, as well as before we entered World War II, right?
Exactly.
Like there's an isolationism, and it's not just distinctly America, but I think America is a great example of it. And it is scary, because that's not how it's gonna, when disasters strike, people move, right? The immigration crisis currently is not refugee, really the refugees. The refugee crisis in Europe right now is a prime example of what's going to come, right? And I think the thing is xenophobia is going to rise because of that. So the social narratives that we have today and start cultivating today on college campuses and public health discussions, I'm trying to start my constitutional law class, like all these places, they're going to be what the next generation of leaders and thinkers hold at their heart when they're interpreting these massive fluctuations of people and of storms and of disasters and potential limitations on, or potential routes for surveillance and other things like that. Like all these really big global problems that are going to cause a massive disarray of other problems in the system are going to have solutions. And the only way to have that is to start having these sort of global catastrophic risk conversations now. You know, we should have started 10 years ago, but you see what I'm getting at?
I do. Of course I do. And if you throw on top of that global climate change and the
Absolutely
increasingly changing coastlines of countries, those are going to force lots of people that live there already to move somewhere else in the same country. And that's going to create equally disparate problems.
Yeah.
So if you don't come to grips with how to live with other people, then as we used to say when I was a teenager, you're screwed, blued, and tattooed. So when it comes to survival, and I guess we can shift the topic now to what could you do that no one could stop that would result in something that could level the playing field, at least in terms of survival?
Meaning-oriented communities.
So what do we need? We need water. You know, look at us as just a biological entity. We need water, 2.3 liters of clean, drinkable water like you're doing right now. I hope that's water. Could be scotch. Who the hell knows? I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
Straight gasoline, actually. Straight gasoline.
Okay. 2, we need about 1,000 calories of safe to eat food.
1,000 or 2,000?
No, 1,000. If you had 1,000, you'd still be fine.
Okay.
You might not be as bulky and as muscular, but you'd still be able to carry out all of your life without a problem. I mean, that's not possible right now throughout the world. I know that there are 1,000 calories out there waiting for every person.
Yeah.
It's just maldistributed. Okay?
Which is, such a major, I mean, we produce twice as much food than we need currently.
Well, guess what? If we could actually work out a system where it's impossible to stop it because it's grassroots, it starts locally and it grows, and that's why I'm so enthusiastic about urban agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
because that's everybody for themselves. Basically, here are the technologies, it's easy to do, why shouldn't you? And the next thing you know, they're doing it. So
it's not based on colonialization either. It's not based off of some it's not like a Mormon trip where people go to like help folks in Africa and like get something from it. It's like, yeah, sure. A part of it could be like some white guy from the States going to some rural village in South Asia and be like, oh, like here's this cool technology. But it's not like he or she would be the one doing it, you know?
Correct.
So there's still an option for like connection, or whatever, but it's not centered on the American person going on and saving these people, right? It's giving people this ability to save, like not save themselves in the sense of like pick yourself up by your bootstraps, but actually giving them the community and humanity and access to sort of knowledge and actions and technology to like actually do it themselves, right? Which is like much more sustainable, right?
Well, you know the old saying, right? Give a person a fish a day and they'll eat for one day. Teach them how to fish and they'll eat for the rest of their lives. And I'm still learning how to fish, by the way. But it's getting easier because I don't have to move around as much because I can't. So therefore, I'm actually learning what's going on in one place, and that's the secret.
Yeah, no, the whole question of learning is especially tricky, especially as a young person who has so many different fields that, you know, I want to connect together and do things in, but it's tricky. But I was gonna say, where was I gonna take it? Climate change.
It's okay.
Oh.
We'll get there.
So back to the initial question of like what do people need? So you said water, food, right? I would say clean air. I would say so. Those are sort of the physical material needs, right? And then beyond that, I think there's a certain psychological need that Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning kind of pointed out from his account as a survivor of Auschwitz, and it was this take that kind of starts off from the central premise that when people were in Auschwitz, it was the most challenging experience of their life. It was literally the Holocaust they were experiencing firsthand, right? And Viktor Frankl noticed that his fellow prisoners who had a sense of hope for whatever reason, and not just hope, but a sense of meaning in pursuit of getting something, right? Their wife was alive, or they thought their kids might still be around, or they thought that they could have a career afterwards. as long as that dream consisted, and it sounds kind of fluffy, but the big point here is that they had a sense of meaning to interpret the pain through. They said, if I get through this, then I can do this other thing, and allowed them to dig deeper, resist harder, and truly be more defiant in the face of a mechanized killing machine, right? And Viktor Frankl himself says that the reason why he survived typhoids on an Auschwitz like medical bed, as he should have been dying from it, was he was frantically scribbling down his theory of like meaning, right? His logotherapy, right? And I just think that insight into the power of meaning, the power of finding not just finding a will, but actually having a route to develop a will, will cultivation or meaning cultivation. It's a really useful thing in a time of crisis when we're up against global problems that seem and truly are so big and so complex that not a single person can do much, right? Because that puts me in a situation where we ask ourselves, can we do anything? And we feel like no, and we get fatalistic, right? But if we have that lesson from Viktor Frankl and realize that meaning is a powerful interpreter of pain and struggle, right, which I truly believe it is, if we can cultivate people's meaning in the direction of combating these global problems, we can get them on track to actually understanding and respecting the complexity and how big these things are. And not in a way that causes them to be more fatalistic, but in a way that says, okay, I can do something small about it. And that's what we need, I feel like.
Coleman, you are absolutely right. So I have some comments to add.
Okay, yeah, please.
No, that's okay. I'm older than you. So I've seen more. That doesn't mean I know more. I've just seen more, okay? So one of my dear friends, her name was Trudy Lepowski. Her name still is Trudy Lepowski. And her husband, Herbert, they worked out at Penn State University out in College Station. No, that's Texas A&M. This is Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. That's where Penn State is. He and his wife worked there for 30 years. She was born in Auschwitz.
Wow.
Born in Auschwitz. Her parents were killed in Auschwitz, but she lived. So she wasn't the product of some rape from some Nazi that came in and raped all the women or anything. These people were having sex while they were in prison. Now, if you can't think of anything more positive than having sex when you're hopeless, the answer is they're not hopeless. You know what they lived for, she told me? They lived for the fact that they knew the Allies were getting closer and closer. And someday they'll be here. All you have to do is survive until that happens. Okay, so that's, you have you ever seen the movie Seven Beauties?
No, I haven't.
With Giancarlo Giannini? Oh, brother, you will. Lena Wertmüller directed that film, and that is a story of survival at its lowest level, but nonetheless, it was about survival. So, and I think Lord of the Flies was another good movie about, survival and privilege and, how to get away with murder when everybody else is dying. And
poor piggy.
Right? So, there are too many examples of this. So I want to come back to the fishing analogy, though, because it really does relate to that. If you're just getting involved in fishing and someone says, you know what we're going to do tomorrow? We're going to go out and fish in the ocean. The guy looks at you and says, or the woman, doesn't matter, the kid, where? It's such a big place. Well, if you don't know the ocean, then you're absolutely right. But if you know something about the ocean and how tides behave and where sandbars are and where rivers come in and where the lagoons are and with the feeding habits of fish, all the details of that, you don't have to fish in the entire ocean. You just fish in this little part over here. All right, so you step into a river and you look around and say, how do I start fishing in, let's say, the Snohomish, which is not too far from where you live? And it's a big river. For God's sakes, where do I even start? Well, start at your feet. So the expression think globally, act locally is invented by a dear friend of mine. There were a lot of other people who was a dear friend of his. It's this man right here. His name is Rene Dubos. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but I knew him. And Rene Dubos invented that saying, because he was concerned about the earth also. And he eventually ended up with a brilliant philosophy. And the brilliant philosophy was, focus. Focus on something that captures your interest and stick with it. Because regardless of where you start, your interest will expand to multiple levels of complexity that's based on that simple observation of wherever you start. So you don't have a choice eventually, but to begin with, you can't afford to be overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation. You have to believe that you can make a difference. That's all it takes.
And I think that self-doubt, and I mean, you've been an educator. You've been a career out being an educator, and if goddamn fine one at that, I have to say. But I,
Don't
but
tell that to my wife.
I'm sure you recognize that. But I'm sure the sort of case of the young college student, undergrad, who is unsure of their capabilities, right? And of learning this sort of new field and this massive sort of burn of college and college life and everything it brings with it, and even non-pandemic times. But there's this struggle of the individual to discover who they are, right? So there's terminology. I'm a big sucker for existential psychology as well as existential philosophy, and I love Carl Jung. I love Adler and these other sort of 20th century psychologists, and especially Maslow talks about the idea of self-actualization, like achieving one's full potential. And I think that there's a there's a quote from a very contentious writer by the name of Karl Marx, who says that an individual,
all bad.
that an individual's true potential is not really achieved unless if they're within a community that is properly sufficient, right? A community that actually functions properly is the only route to an individual fully realizing their capabilities. And I think that's totally true. I think that's absolutely a fair take on this. And I think that colleges do that often for people. They get the right social group, they get the right relationship with professors, and that can really open them up to not only new ways of viewing themselves in the world, but also new ways of interacting with the world, functioning, right? And that's what drives growth. So if you can do that in the right way, you're driving growth towards your actual potential, right? Which is a deeply psychologically rewarding thing. And there's an idea that I've been working on for a very long time now. And I think it might be just the thing that allows us to think globally and act locally, and something called meaning-oriented communities, MOC. Could I take a minute and tell you about MOC?
Your podcast. Please do.
So MOC has two pieces. The first one is the theory, and the second part is the practical implementation side of it, right? But the theory behind MOC is Viktor Frankl's ideas around meaning and the importance of just cultivating a sense of purpose, right? And I want to use that finding, in addition to other ideas from philosophy and psychology, proposed in an accessible way to folks, to help people have a better sense of actually how to cultivate their sense of purpose. Because right now there's tons of college kids. There's two problems here. First one is there's a ton of college kids my age who are told, find your purpose, find your purpose. It is hard to do that when you're not told how. Exactly, right? Like it's like, and they're like, oh, well, I'm like a junior or senior in high school or in college.
No, I get that question a lot.
And it's like, and then we don't really have the social narratives to actually guide people towards that, because we don't talk about something as being something in terms of like cultivation and investment in things and responsibility. All those like feed into a sense of purpose, right?
You're right.
But a big one is impact. And impact doesn't necessarily have to be consequence of action. It can be impact of vision or like striving after something. And I think that the central idea of meaning-oriented communities, the implementation side of it, is to solve the other big problems. So the first big problem is purpose, or helping people achieve this sort of panacea for modern day alienation from the system, right? We have all these psychological problems that are a byproduct of being alienated from, or the alienation of the modern world, right? It's hard to find communities. It's hard, like our traditional routes to meaning and purpose are kind of eroding away right now and have been for a while. And that drove nationalism, right? Nietzsche said that would drive nationalism, and he was right. So there's that problem. The other problem is actual global risks, like actual real tangible global problems. And those start in your community and they go as high up as the meta sort of political or economic structure. So it's a really layered thing that's hyper complex. But what that means is that there's a position for everyone, no matter their interest, to have some level of impact on these global issues. So if climate change is the byproduct of our entire society, that means that the members of our entire society on any strata or whatever way elitists like cut it, right? There is a position for everyone to, like, regardless of interest, passion, or disposition, to do something meaningful. And I think that is the narrative for climate change and other risks that is so critical. So what I want to do is, and I have the first group in the works right now. I'm presenting on it next week at my university. I'm excited to see where it goes, but I want to start groups called meaning-oriented communities. I'm going to start with one at my university and see where else we can branch it out to. That takes a group of people and says, okay, here are some basic ideas from Viktor Frankl and other sort of thinkers and philosophers made accessible, and put it in context of their larger life, right? And saying, okay, we are going to work on, as a community together, getting us the resources and companionship to be able to actually set goals and goals within global risk, or identify problems in the world that we feel are real. And then, since we have the terminology of meaning cultivation, we can cultivate our meaning in direction of solving those problems, right? So you can start locally, or it can be something as simple as, like, I want to learn how I can get into, I don't know, oceanification science. So then you, like, get on that educational path, and, like, the resources that someone provides is, like, knowledge on, like, what classes you could take, that sort of thing. Or it could be something as big as, like, how to get more involved in climate protests, or, how to start your own organization, or your own integration of your
No, it all works because it's it's a seed that grows into a plant.
Exactly. Based off of community, based off the power of community to make problems real. Because that's the thing. Climate change doesn't feel real to people right now. It feels real to some people, and it's getting realer, but it doesn't feel real to people right now. And AI doesn't feel real to people right now. And we have this alienation from the actual facts of our future, right? Which is kind of a funny saying. But I think that communities can help reinforce how real those things are. So it's community, meaning, and global risk are the three pillars of this thing. But yeah, I just figured that I would present that because I've been thinking about it.
No, that's great, because I think that people get overwhelmed by the concept of a problem like global climate change, rapid global climate change, because climate change is normal, or helping starving Chinese children, or in interfacing with great neglected diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, and AIDS, and things of this sort. And if it doesn't matter where you start, okay, but you won't solve that problem by being overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, fatalism doesn't do anything. Yeah,
that's their problem. Your problem is to find out how to interface with them to help them prevent further degradation. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of examples out there of where this has worked out beautifully, where like this little girl from Sweden, Greta, she gets up and she starts to say, wait a minute, this is my world too. How can you possibly do this to me? She started with herself and said, look, I'm part of this and I don't want any more of it. And it's your fault. And people began to listen. And of course, now she's a prize winner. She's got a lot of money. She doesn't know what to do with it. I think that's okay. Not a problem, because she'll eventually find out what to do. So I think there are so many wonderful people. Mahatma Gandhi would be another role model for you, because obviously he was involved in individualizing the politics of India.
Yeah.
And once you did that, the British were totally extraneous. They had no purpose, because they couldn't rule anybody anymore. No one would do anything. What are you talking about? It's hot. Start fanning. Sorry, I'm busy spinning. So, that's nonviolent protest, obviously, but you're not really protesting because you're teaching people how to become independent.
Yeah. I would say interdependent, because it's also showing people the value of community-based. Yeah.
So I must tell you, I love talking with you, by the way, because you mentioned things that I can really resonate with. So I knew the director of the Jung Institute.
Oh, whoa.
his brother and I used to fish together. His brother's name was Joel Hillman, and James Hillman, if you look him up, you can see James Hillman he's no longer alive, but he was Joel Hillman's brother. He was the director of the Young Institute for about, 25 years. He was a wonderful guy. I knew him very well. One of his books actually made it to Oprah's.
Whoa.
And I learned from Henrietta, who was married to Joel Hillman. Mm-hmm. James Hillman used words that nobody knew the meaning of, because obviously they had been derived from prior concepts that no one ever thought about. But of course he did. The collective unconsciousness and all these other things that
the shadow self.
Guess what? He was a regular guy.
Yeah.
He was not one of these ethereal Plato and Socrates kind
idealists,
of people.
Yeah.
And so the University of Chicago had their 10 most important people that have ever lived list on the back of a sweatshirt. And Socrates was on that list, but so was James Hillman.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, and he firmly believed that philosophy begins with a positive outlook. You can't be a negative person and accomplish anything except negativity.
Yeah.
Right? So I know that Crosby, Stills, and Nash is probably before your time, but I'm sure you must know who they are. And so they had a line from one of their songs, which I use constantly when I try to inspire young people, because it inspired an entire generation when that line first arose. And it's, rejoice, rejoice, we have no choice. Think about it. We have no choice. Of course, you do have a choice. You can be negative, or you can be positive. And what you're really saying is, as long as you remain positive and you think you have a future that's better than the one you have, then you'll strive to achieve that. And wasn't that the goal of Faust? That's how he avoided going to hell. The devil owned his soul, but he kept working. Why would you keep working if you know you're going to? Well, because, it was sort of counterproductive for the devil to have someone working, because, okay, so that concept goes back to Schiller and all kinds of other people. And
So this idea of resistance being meaningful or valuable in some capacity.
When someone tells you, though, that there's a difference between you and me, or there's a difference between us and them.
Oh, yeah.
That's negative. Right now, that starts as negative. And then the counter argument, of course, is biologically, you couldn't tell them from us if you looked at their DNA sequences. There's no way that you can tell. So there's some wonderful songs that deal with this too. Sometimes you take songs from wherever you get, and you have to be carefully taught how to hate. Yeah. Grow up with a gene for hatred. You grow up in a milieu that is hatred is part of that milieu, and you become part of that. So I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of disgruntled people throughout this country, at least.
Yeah, dissatisfaction.
Who have not gotten their way about a lot of things.
Absolutely.
And finally they say, well, it's an elitist government that we have, and we're going to get rid of them. We don't even want a politician. We want a businessman, right? I mean, God forbid I should go on about this. I'd rather talk about something positive, but it's easy to see how that can snowball into factions that remain ensconced in their point of view. The only way you can possibly counteract it, and you're absolutely right, is through education. But if your education starts with the premise that evolution doesn't exist, or that this is your book, why would you ever read another book? This is the Bible, and if you read this book, you're good. You know how many Bibles there are? I mean, every culture has a Bible, and every one of them reads differently. And they all have the same premise, but it's interesting. They all have the same premise. Everybody is created equal, but we are a little bit more equal than everybody else. Then that's the difference. And why would you ever think that?
Yeah.
What would give you reason for doing that? Because if you didn't, you lost your head. Well, no, you didn't lose your head. We will lose a head for you in public to show you what will happen if you don't believe. You just need a couple of good examples. After that, everybody's on board. And to see why Germany went along with Germans during that period, there were families that lived right next to Jewish families, and they shared businesses, they shared commerce, they shared dinners, they shared marriages.
Yeah.
But when it became us versus them, there was, I guess, an amnesia that set in. So there was a documentary made for public television about, it's probably 20 years ago now. I taught at Columbia University's medical school. It's in the middle of a large Jewish settlement. Those people moved to New York City prior to the Second World War. So this person that made this documentary went to Germany, this little town, and tried to look up what happened to the Jews of, and the name of this story was what happened to the Jews of. And the name of this town, I'm blocking on the name, but it didn't matter. Because when this woman went back and started to interview all the people in the town after the war was over for 20 years. You people had Jews in your town. What happened to them? Well, my parents told me that all of the males were taken away and all the females and children were allowed to leave. That's what happened to them. And we don't know where they went. So the question was, well, shit, they had to go somewhere. We do know where the males went. The old males got shot or they were allowed to leave. The young males were sent off to work camps. And the very young were allowed to go with their mother and their older parents. And they all moved to places like where I taught. So there were about 20 families that were interviewed within blocks of where I spent 38 years of teaching. And they said, oh, let me show you the pictures. So they got their albums, right? And they said, this was our bakery. And here are the Joneses and the Schmidts and the Reichenfellers and the Goldschmidts. They're all standing together because they're sharing bagels or they're sharing some food together. And they're having a good time. So these are the people that we knew while we lived there. And I don't know what happened to them, but this is what happened to us. Then the person, she, of course, photographed all those people, showing her the pictures. Then she went back with the pictures and she showed them to those people. She found out where those people were. And she sat them down and she said, you know where they went? Let me show you. And they filmed the people watching her show them the pictures of 1937, 1936, 1935, when the parents were friends with all of the Jews and all the non-Jews in that community.
Before the seeds of division had been laid fully, right? Which I think the crazy thing is, oh, sorry.
No, the black shirts, not the brown shirts, but the black shirts. That was the party that gave rise to the Nazis.
Yeah.
They were the ones that put that seed in place. So, so what they filmed were these people's memories coming back to them. Their eyes filled with tears. They started to cry. They sobbed. They openly sobbed because they had held back thinking about what they did to facilitate that. And they didn't want to be part of that guilt because they didn't feel that way. Just somebody told me to feel that way. So I guess I should, because otherwise, off with my head. So I don't want my head to disappear. I want to live. And so they reunited these people by this film.
Oh, wow.
And that was absolutely stunning because I think, given the option, some of those people would gladly move back to that little German town and resume their lives. So how do you break down that deep an embedded prejudice? How do you do that? And this woman had the secret. The secret is the truth, okay? And you may not want to see that truth, and I'm not even going to tell you that that's the truth. I'm just going to show you. It's up to you to decide whether that's true or not. Now, you know what that sounds like? I can tell you exactly what that sounds like because there's no difference. It sounds like being presented with a set of scientific facts. Scientific facts are neutral. They are not Democratic. They are not Republican. They are not liberal. They are not conservative. They are not Jewish, Catholic, Protestant. They are just facts. Okay? So I'm a scientist. I collect facts. That's what you do. You go to the lab and you collect facts. What do you do with those facts? You make stories out of them. You tell stories. Biological stories is what I told. And if the facts fit the story, then it's a good story. Sometimes, though, you start to tell one story and the facts say, you know, that was a good story for a while, but it's no longer a good story because this is the fact that destroyed the thread of what you were trying to say. So you're going to have to change your story. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Most scientists that build careers on that story, they don't change their facts. They stay with their own facts. They may want to change the story, but they continue to accumulate what they would call facts that support that story. Because their career, I'm Mr. Polio vaccine man, or I'm Mr. or I'm Mrs. this and I'm Mr. that. So I have a saying that says, trust science, don't trust scientists. And it's true. I mean, we're just people. We just have us to blame for whatever happens because we are the creators of our own destinies. And if you can remain neutral and accumulate facts, and wherever they lead, you're following a path of truth, you're going to be a very successful scientist. And I can promise you that this gentleman right here that I already showed you, Rene Dubos, and many, 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 many other people like him, they didn't give a hoot where that story led. All they wanted to see was what the next chapter was. Okay, so what you're hearing now, though, today is a collection of facts and alternate facts. Now, there's no such thing as an alternate fact, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's called an alternate fact because they want you to believe that it's a fact. Oh, yeah, that's your facts. I have some other facts that I'd like to show you that proves for once and for all that the Brontosaurus was the vehicle that cave people rode to get from place to place. And the proof of that is in Dolly World. You can go to Dolly World and they have, dioramas of people, cave person sitting with a leopard skin leotard, sitting on top of a Brontosaurus with reins and riding this little, not so little, big giant creature. So people lived at the time of dinosaurs because the Earth is only 4,000 years old. So when you encounter alternate interpretations of quite, I would call them, I'm looking for the metaphors. They're all metaphors. Okay? When you go through the Bible and you look at all these stories, they're metaphors. They are meant as morality examples. Here's what happens to the Good Samaritan. Here's what happens when you don't be the good. All those things. It's just teaching you a way of life that allows you to treat everybody the same. But when they say the earth was created in 7 days, it's a little hard to accept that fact because at the time of the Bible was written, well, I'm not going to go back to that, but I'm just saying that if you are brought up thinking that that's your only resource, then this is the result.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the result. So no matter how much logic you want to apply to a situation, no matter how much philosophy, no matter that you're right or wrong, you're going to have to go back before the time that people are taught how to behave and how to be, okay? And if parents are conscious of this because their own lives were altered by that, and they don't want their children to be altered by that, then they want you to obtain the best education you can possibly obtain. So another song by John Lennon and company says that the more you travel, the less you know. The more you see, the less you know, because everything that you ever thought about of that place, wherever you haven't been yet, is predicated on, images presented by alternate facts. When you actually get there and you see that these are just other people trying to eke out a living as best they can in places like India and Bangladesh and China and Russia and South America. If you go to those places and you travel enough and you get to know some of those people, you realize that There's no difference at all, basically. We're all basically trying to achieve the same things: food, water, clean air, housing, clothing. The rest is extra. So, we're talking about the extras right now because I think that I don't think you'll ever have a country where everybody thinks the same way. You can't have a country like that. That's not going to work. So democracy is a work in progress that will never not be a work in progress. It will fail, and then it will revolt against the failure, which was totalitarianism, and reemerge as a new version of democracy. And I can tell you now, I mean, do you remember just recently in history what happened in Poland? Poland was sort of they inherited all of the communist leadership as the Iron Curtain broke down. Those people were discarded, new people brought in. They had a wonderful rebirth of Polish culture and food and travel and inventiveness, and everybody was proud to be Polish. These people never went away. They just waited for the right opportunity to come back into the city one at a time. And eventually they've condensed the thinking of the Polish public back into a rigorous, one moment, please. I'll call you.
Okay.
My wife was asking me if I needed anything from the outside. Are you kidding?
That's so nice.
I need a vaccination right now. So you can see it. You can ebb and flow. Russia the same. But Putin didn't go away. He was the head of the KGB, for God's sake. So else would we want to appoint as the head of a country? Well, you know what? We had our own. We had Bush Senior. He was the head of the CIA. We tend to forget that, but I didn't. And you become more restrictive or less restrictive, and people ebb and flow with it. And we're so polyglot. I like the word polyglot because wherever you look, we're like alloys of human conditions.
Yeah.
We're part aluminum, and we're part titanium, and we're part lead, and we're part zinc, and all kinds of other things thrown
because
together.
of the social context, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there are some great advantages to that. You get unique art, you get unique cuisines, you get unique creativity with regards to literature and music.
Mm-hmm.
You also get isolationism and nationalism and chauvinism is the best way to put that. And you can't avoid it because people want to identify with something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what do they identify with? They don't identify with the air or just bare earth. They identify with, I grew up on a farm in the middle of Iowa. I love the fields of corn, and they're using that for ethanol production. What? And you can't but empathize with people for being romantic about where they were raised and brought up.
Nostalgia is
no matter how awful it was. Even Gary, Indiana. People think about going back to Gary, Indiana. It was a horrible steel mill town with lots of air pollution and stuff. And today it's risen above that, basically. It's become a place to actually settle down and have a nice life. And so, we're ranting a little bit, aren't we? But
wouldn't have it any other way.
When you try to pigeonhole defining what humanity is, you have to start with the DNA molecule, I think. And if you do that, then there are small variations, but mostly I cannot tell what you are by reading your DNA sequence. I don't know if you're male or female or big or small or orange or white or yellow. I don't know. I just know that you're a 23,000 genes encoded by an enormous amount of material with only 4 letters.
Yeah.
How odd that should come out like that. How odd that something so simple
can be something.
It sounds like a chemical equivalent of a fractal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, by the way, I actually met Mandelbrot. So his birthday was just recently, by the way. Last week was his 96th birthday, and I actually met him once. And I didn't understand a word he said, of course. I at least had some of his DNA rub off on my hand because we shook hands.
Oh yeah, yeah, it still might be there. A couple atoms, maybe a
Yeah,
couple
it's not going to
molecules.
help. I'm a big picture person. I'm definitely not a quantitative person. But I think when you look up at the sky and you wonder what all that is about, and you're waxing philosophic about everything. There are times when we do that. It's grand to just realize that we are.
Yeah,
We just
yeah.
are. And for all of our flaws of DNA, of course, there are some bad versions of DNA. You mentioned typhus, typhoid. I can go through a whole list. But they all have their purpose. Everything has a purpose, and everything is linked, and everything is interconnected. And that's the conundrum is that how do you teach that? How do you
Because it's the
teach that?
totality of things, right? It's the totality of complexity of
It's
interactions.
it's it's inseparable. If you take one thing away, everything else changes.
I typically, I'm, you do my job for me right now, frankly. I usually am the one who has to bring the philosophy
This
into
is
it,
not
but
a
you're
job.
already.
No. Listen, I have a PhD. The PH stands for philosophy. I don't want to tell you what the D stands for, but you know how those initials are derived, right?
No idea. It's
So BS is
philosophy.
bullshit, absolute bullshit, right? MS is more of the same, and PhD is piled high deeper. So that's the way that shakes out. And then MD means more dollars. I haven't worked out for the judges yet, but we'll get to them.
Yeah, that's the next iteration.
Right. So I'm sure you're convinced of this, and I know that I sure am. Everybody has a unique take on everything.
Yeah.
All right. It doesn't matter what you say, and that's why the polls were wrong in this election. People will tell you what you think you want to hear, but they'll do what they want to do. All right. So polling people and asking them for opinions, they think they're on reality television show or something. So they behave, but they behave poorly usually. So ultimately we end up with a philosophy, an individual philosophy, which either works for you to allow you to expand your world, or it works for you to allow you to contract into a very small pocket of definable life that has nothing to do with anybody else except those people that immediately surround you. And you can live like that in a city, you can live like that in a country, it doesn't matter where you are. Your circle is definable by how you perceive the world as you grow.
And it's that central.
You agree with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think beyond that being a great sort of example of the individual kind of matching the society in a really weird way. It's almost like Plato's tripartition of the soul matching his tripartition of the city state, right? It's like there tends to be this tendency, and I mean Hegel does it as well. Same with parts of Marx, where they talk about these sort of psychological philosophers from history, as well as some economic ones like Marx. Kind of suggests that the structure of the human mind, or how they understood it at the time they were writing, somehow matches the external sort of larger system to some capacity, right? And I don't know how good of an idea that is, but I do like the idea of thinking of people who are integrated enough, whatever that means, whatever that requires, to be able to approach life in expansionary sort of developing the horizon sort of route, are able to expand their actual intellectual sort of like corn feed. It's like we're able to supply the individual's like mind and like soul, if you will, with more potentially substantive like food, like the necessities that we need to thrive and flourish as individuals in a complex world. And the same things with the complex, like more complex integrated societies also do that, and by complex I don't mean economically or productive or systems. I mean complexity among people, diversity among people, right? And I think that this tendency towards isolation can be expressed, isolationism on the individual level, being like, okay, like I don't want to, I just want to be comfortable with what I'm comfortable with, like routine. the sort of larger society version of that is xenophobia. It's a fear of the other. It's a fear of the outside, and that can be expressed in human nature terms, right? We like what is familiar, but also what isn't familiar can be incredibly powerful, right? It can be incredibly valuable. And I think that as someone who has spent a lot of time being confused in their life, right? Growing up, a cacophony of anxiety or depression, these sort of lenses that color perception of reality, led me towards philosophy and psychology because I wanted to figure out what the hell was going on, right? And much of that lesson so far, because it's really one lesson in full with many different individual chapters, is that comfort with the unknown, comfort between the two states of either order or perceived order and chaos, whether perceived or unperceived, that comfortableness with shifting between those two states is a massively valuable thing. And I think that that's something that this alien, or not this, I keep saying alienation, but this isolation that you're talking about, this isolationism, whether it's on a country level or on the individual's level or smaller community level, this us versus them mentality, if you will, is not just something that we apply to ideas in our own personal life or to other people in real life, but also to the approaches that we decide to take upon life. So finding a route to invigorate people, to have them feel comfortable enough being them, and having the right lessons of this sort of universal framework, as Spinoza calls it, the universal perspective, having that sort of view and having a sobering view of reality, an existential view of reality, we're all in the same boat and it fucking is rocky. We're in rough seas. No matter who you are, life is going to be difficult. Death is going to happen, So finding that as a central message, a central tenet can really help people get into this mindset of, okay, I have to take things seriously. And beyond taking things seriously, I need to recognize that I have an individual part to play in this. I am responsible ethically to some degree, no matter what my ethics system is, right? There is some level of certainty and some level of confidence saying that every person alive right now is somehow contributing to the answer on the potentially the final exam of humanity of if we survive this next century. Every person alive today can answer one of those questions out of the 8 billion to 10 billion answers to be asked.
Right. So I want to come back to this guy again here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, there's a book that he wrote. He didn't write this book, by the way. This book was written after he died.
Oh, okay.
So let me tell you two things about him that really will form the basis for the next 5 minutes of discussion, at least. Number one is that he discovered the first antibiotic. All right, now Alexander Fleming is good.
Yeah.
But Rene Dubos actually discovered the first antibiotic, and he did so in a very humble way. He wrote it down in his lab notebooks, and he had dates and everything else, right? And so long after Alexander Fleming had published and benefited from penicillin and all these other things, Rene Dubos's lab book clearly showed that there was a drug called gramicidin, which you can still buy, and it's in an ointment. And if you have a bird that gets infected, you grab this and you put it on, and it cures the infection on the surface. But if you take gramicidin and you inject it like you would for penicillin, you'll kill the microbes, all right, and then the day later you'll die because it kills everything. It's a germicide that kills everything. It's a potent antibiotic, to say the least.
What do you know around what year it was invented?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly. It was in the 20s.
Okay.
It's in this book. I did remember Alexander Fleming was 1928, as I recall.
Yeah.
And by the way, he did not appreciate his discovery. It took World War II to go back and say, you know what? We've got a drug here. Why aren't we using it? Yeah, exactly right. So
it was also used for syphilis cures in the U.S. military. They were like, oh, all of our guys are getting these diseases.
True. So okay, that was one thing he did, but it did not affect him. To know that he just discovered this very potent antibiotic, which of course had topical use, but not universal use.
Yeah.
But he was an observer of life. So he wrote a book. He wrote several. But the book I'm going to tell you about now is called So Human and Animal. I would love you to read it.
Mm.
Okay, So Human and Animal. He wrote this book in 1967. The book won the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction that year. And what does this book say? The essence of the book is really simple. And this is not a spoiler alert. This is just like, this is the executive summary of the executive summary. It says that people that grow up in an environment support the institutions of that environment. That's all he says. So if you grow up in Forest Hills, New York, which is a very wealthy community, and you expect that there's a lawn society that tells you how close to the ground you're supposed to cut your grass and the color of the bricks that go into your house so that the entire place looks beautiful and neat and sort of like Edward Scissorhands. If you believe that, if you're brought up in that, by the way, you have no choice. You're brought up in it, you accept it. By the time you get to be an adult, you think everybody should be living that way. Why the hell why doesn't everybody live like this? I did. Okay.
Must be the right way to go if that's what
it must be the right way. But if you grow up in, let's say, inner city Baltimore, and I'm just picking a random city now, right? But you pick a lot of cities that have incredible poverty in certain districts. And those are, by the way, in my view, they're purposefully maintained to show you the difference between the haves and the have-nots. And it makes you strive even harder to become a have.
Yeah.
That's the purpose, I think. I would hate to think that there are more malicious reasons for that. But the point is that people who grow up in those impoverished neighborhoods, they end up supporting those impoverished neighborhoods. All of the institutions of them are as strongly adhered to as the ones in Forest Hills. That's what his book says, and it's absolutely true. You try to change a person's view, he says the hardest thing to do is to get change in a neighborhood. That's the hardest thing to do. Now, there are other lessons that he talks about in the book, but the point is that he wanted to know if there is a way of structuring the physical environment of people, which favors equality, which favors positive outlook, and which favors sharing. Is there a physical structure to the way the built environment is put together that you don't have a choice? When you grow up in it, that's how you're going to be. Just like if you grow up in Forest Hills, that's the way you're going to be. If you grow up in inner city Baltimore, that's the way you're going to be. I want a physical environment that makes me the way I am today, which encourages sharing. It encourages creativity. It encourages health. It encourages all of those things. Could be you don't have a choice because you grew up in that area.
Do you see this as a more...
So did we ever have we ever had an environment, however small or large? I know you're thinking about utopia and all kinds of experimental projects that broke down because human beings are unfortunately flawed in social ways which create differences. And these differences are always emphasized. And I'm just a businessman, but I want to be a billionaire, okay? Being a billionaire means somebody else is a non-heir. They have zero because there's only so much wealth, so it had to go someplace, right? The Greeks had slaves, and yet they still believed in democracy of some sort.
Yeah, that's
so.
Oh yeah. Wait, what? Sorry, go on.
So I want a model for a large collection of people, in which everybody has enough to eat, everybody has enough to drink, everybody has a place to live, everybody can learn at their own pace, and that's mixed in terms of what you would consider ethnicities. Okay, but the genetics is obviously another question. But
Mm.
I want people to. This is my ideal. Obviously, it's an ideal. It's like, sure, Plato had lots of ideals also. Sure. The ideal chair, the ideal couch, the ideal. This is the ideal.
This is your realm of forms.
Yeah, to grow up in a physical environment that prohibited by design, not by edict, not by learning examples, not by punishment, not by reward, simply by physically growing up in
that structure.
In that structure, you become a person of the earth, not of, Forest Hills or inner city Baltimore. You become an earth citizen that can now exchange with aliens should we ever encounter them. Or you can go live on Mars because the city that we're going to create on Mars is that city. It has to be. You haven't got room for poverty on that. You haven't got room for, everybody has to do something to keep this community together. And so if you involve everyone, which means you can't exclude anyone.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the that's the key.
Yeah, that's the other side of this, of course. Are you listening, Mitch McConnell? These people think they're accomplishing something by discouraging cooperativity.
Well, they are for themselves, though. That's the thing. And you can argue, and I would certainly agree that in actuality, they aren't doing anything for themselves. Because hurting thy neighbor is hurting yourself or something?
Yeah.
That's a pretty substantiated philosophical claim from Plato, right?
Yeah, sure.
The reason to act justly in part is because to act justly onto others, it's almost religious in its sense.
You're right.
But it benefits you, and then beyond sort of the egoism of it, beyond just the what's in it for me, there's a deeper there's a deeper expansion of what is you, though. That's the thing. Is because you're defined by relations to others, right?
You are not you. You are everything.
Yeah, you are, but you're the aggregate.
You're not a Borg. You're not a Borg.
Not yet.
You're not a Borg. So resistance is still futile. It's not futile. I'm sorry. Resistance is not futile. Right. Well, work. So when people grow up in those nurturing environments, you're obviously one of those people because you're obviously not committed to a given thought pattern which would inhibit you from including other ideas.
Which is expansion of the ideas, which then allows an actual marketplace of the ideas to expand.
Bingo.
Which there's so many. Your experience as an educator and public health expert, I feel, are definitely shining through right now. I was going to ask, how is this a more sustained and sustainable route to effective public health measures too? Because I know, because that's what I really appreciate about your work. Yeah.
Public health issues dominate the physical structure.
Yeah.
So you cannot have
embodiments of the failure.
You can't have disease outbreaks because the water is contaminated. You can't have lung cancers from the air that's contaminated. You can't have food that's unhealthy to eat because it's rotting in the shelves. That doesn't exist. It's not possible. We have designed a world in which that is not possible without restricting our ability to express our individuality.
Yeah, and having that level of autonomy, which I think is typically something that I'm fascinated by discussions of new systems, right? New global ways of going about things. And I think that any sustainable answer to that will actually, pragmatically speaking, unify people's work to change the current system, right? Is because we're already broken up into tribes. We have to work with that, like not exacerbate the tribalism, but we have to work and take action with that idea that people are already splitting up in mind. And I think the way that we can do that is through a synthesization of the two primary approaches to it right now, the bulk majority being capitalism and neoliberalism, right? And then the other half, really it's more of a margin, but there's still a lot of sympathies, is a more socialist, and then on the farther extreme, communistic approach to it, right? And I think that taking these historical, economic, and philosophical principles to how to, structure and order society, at least the non-religious ones, and integrating them into each other and asking ourselves what parts from each can we actually take and divulge, and to actually maximize that, I guess like that ability for individuals within the system to expand their horizons intellectually, right? Because that's what's really probably going to produce the best marketplace of ideas, which I don't believe in the free market, but I definitely believe in the marketplace of ideas, right? I think certain ideas can be more appealing to people, but that's based off of experience, right? So I think being able to learn and become accustomed with the rhetoric from both sides while trying to develop the sort of integrated model that takes pieces of both, right? Because obviously capitalism has done a lot in terms of adding productivity, but it hasn't done a lot when it comes to actually distributing that fairly by any degree, right? By any stretch of the imagination.
Very true.
And I think that there are lessons from both systems and their failures respectively that kind of at least tells me that one is not necessarily the full answer, right? I mean, I think it's obvious now with capitalism that's not the full answer, that something has to change.
So I had the privilege of meeting and talking with an individual who was a leader in the Onondagan Indian tribe in New York State, they're just south of Syracuse, New York. And the stories that he would tell, but they're legends basically, or they're morality plays, or they are descriptions of why we behave now the way we do rather than the way we did. So he told a story to this large audience of how there were 7 tribes living in New England. And there were the Mohawk, these tribes, so the Iroquois, the Onondagans, the Hurons, I believe, were included in that also. And there were several other tribes. You say we're tribal. Of course we're tribal. And in those days, the resources were limited because they were hunter-gatherers. So whoever hunted and gathered quickly and more efficiently became the dominant. And this created discrepancies. No horses yet. And they would fight with each other for those resources. And then the other tribe would gain, and he just kept doing this with his hands. Number 1, number 2, number 3, he got up to 7. Number 7 was the dominant once, and then back down again. And it was terribly destructive and divisive. And then he said, about 1,000 years ago, a great power descended from the sky and forced all 7 leaders to meet inside of a teepee. Now, I'm spoiling this story because it's more elegant than that. But the end result was they agreed that their way of living was wrong and that they should change. And in which direction now? How are you going to change? So they became a true democracy. By the way, you wonder where the concept of democracy came from. This is where it came from. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. So before that, there were royalties and there were churches and there were leaders, but there was not democracy, not anywhere near that. And all of a sudden, these 7 tribes agreed that everyone should be treated equal. Everyone should be allowed to speak. And we should be grateful for the great creator for allowing nature to exist, because that's what keeps us alive. So we must revere it and we must protect it. Oh, really? Really? So this story is worth investigating, by the way. I would really look into it because I think it's been written up in an elegant way. The Iroquois became educated at Harvard, as I recall, and developed a written language, which you can now translate back into English if you want. And as simplistic as it sounds, it's a very difficult thing to maintain because they meet, all these tribes still meet once a year. It's not called a powwow, they call it something else. And they all sit down and they all discuss their individual problems.
Oh, wow.
work on resources to even out the disparities.
That still goes on?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So in the end, all of these tribes end up sharing whatever wealth there is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that didn't take place in a lot of other First Peoples. For instance, the Utes in the southern part of Utah and the northern part of Colorado, they were pushed onto land that actually had lots of oil and gas on it. And they kept that all for themselves. Mm-hmm. They have never shared that wealth with anybody to speak of. And there's been a lot of corruption, the Bureau of Land Management and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, all those corruption influences. And we distributed the native peoples throughout this country in such a way that they don't even recognize themselves anymore. But the Onondagans, the Iroquois, the Mohawks, the Mohegans, several other tribes have maintained, maybe the Passamaquoddy are included in that as well, or Maine tribe. Those peoples, and you live in an area like that as well, by the way.
Yeah.
So, and they're revered and they're respected and they keep to themselves. They don't get involved in local politics for the most part. If you read Tony Hillerman, nobody gets involved in local politics. He wrote about the Four Corners region. That's worth reading. It's another good set of stories. But the point is we can take big lessons from this. And so the early American European settlers divided off between the French and the English. And I just finished rewatching Last of the Mohegans, and Daniel Day O'Connor was great in the movie, but there was a little stretch of truth in every direction.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And so the ones that survived became steel workers and they had no fear of heights. So they're used as steel workers on construction projects because they will gladly walk across a beam to get to the other side without any tethering devices. And crazy, right?
Yeah.
But that's how they become known, because they're fearless. They developed this belief that they had control of everything they did.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the big lesson here is that 1,000 years ago there was this huge change. The killings stopped. The tribes flourished. They shared resources. They all behaved communally, not communistically. Communally, they still had their own private
autonomies,
autonomies and belief systems, but they shared in what allowed your life to occur without hindrance.
Yeah, which is the base level of sharing, I think. And I mean I like FDR a lot. He obviously is U.S. president, so responsible for some bad things. But I still appreciate his approach to democracy, especially in a time where Freudian American politics was at an all-time high, and the idea of controlling the masses, not allowing them to have a voice, was at an all-time high due to his Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, right? And this sort of tendency to be afraid of the masses' democratic voice is, I think we've been shown from the 20th century that it's not a cut and dry problem. It's not it's democracy is something that has to be protected, I guess is what I'm getting at. And I think the way that it's actually protected effectively is through developing a system of universal care, in the sense of making sure that people have the bare minimum provide for them.
Bare minimum good.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. The bare minimum good, which, I mean, if that requires taking, someone's like massive amount of wealth, or a percentage of that wealth, when they're like gaining it each year, if taxes, if it just means increasing taxes to the point where it can actually provide for everyone to have that basic minimum good. I think that is.
How can they be opposed to healthcare?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
How does that work?
But it works.
Aren't they going to get old? Don't they get sick? What's wrong with you?
Exactly.
What the hell is wrong with you people? And so you feel like shaking them. You can't do that. So
just shaking Bezos.
It's maddening. So
just falls
I had one more. I had one more little
soliloquy
thing to add, and then I'm running out of voice, to be honest with you. We should make this part 2 of a multiple part series.
I absolutely think so, yeah.
But I have a reading recommendation for your listeners that a lot of them might know already anyway. It's a book that's written by Richard, and I'll come up with his last name in a minute, but the name of the book is The Overstory. Do you know this book?
That's cool. No, I've never heard of it. Overstory.
Oh, you will love this book. Powers, his last name is Powers, Richard Powers. It's called The Overstory. Now, when you think about the overstory as it applies to biology, and this book is about biology, but it's you'll see in a minute. You always think of the opposite when the overstory is mentioned, because you've never called it that. It has another name. The name of it is the canopy. Yeah. Trees have a canopy. And for biologists, for foresters, that's called the overstory. But what we're really concerned about is what happens on the understory, because that's the land that the tree grows out of. Yeah. So
it's the source of nutrients.
The understory, yeah, everything comes from there, except in the tropics, of course, because a lot of things come out of the air as well. So this book is a book of stories. There are 6 or 8 different stories that each one in time travel throughout the book comes together to talk about the involvement of those 8 stories with regards to a single kind of tree. Each one is a different kind of tree. Each one offers something different to each one of those groups.
So it's interconnection.
It's all interconnected.
Oh, that's cool.
The author, he won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, but all of the stories that he told about the trees are true. So he weaves biology of trees into all of these stories: the American chestnut, the sequoia, the lychee tree. I think there's one about the ginkgo. I'm probably fading on my memory with regards to the kinds of trees, but each story has a different tree as the center focus that involves all these people. And the book is written in such a way as that every story is written as though a different person was writing that story. So the first story is written in the same style. The next story is written in a different style, same author though. The third story is written in yet a different style, same author. And in the end, they all come together.
They all mesh together. So the stylistic.
It's remarkable. And the reason why he's doing it that way is because if you look at a hardwood forest, even where you live, it's mostly pine, it's mostly gymnosperms rather than angiosperms, right? But if you look at a typical New England forest as a contrast, right? You might have 30 or 40 different species of pine trees where you are. A typical hardwood forest has about 200 or 300 different species. And what's remarkable, they're all different species. You can tell them apart by their leaf structures, their fruits, their nuts, their root systems, the life forms that they attract. There's this connector underneath called mycorrhiza. You ever hear of that one?
I have.
Okay, they're fungi that connect all the roots to all the other roots in a hardwood forest. So, for instance, when it rains and the trees are on a slope, the trees at the top get very little rain because it all washes down, right? It comes down to the bottom. So the trees at the bottom have all this water. They don't know what to do with it. You know what they do? They send it back up to the top.
Through the subterranean network of, is it mycorrhizin? Is that the name of the?
It is mycorrhiza. Yeah, the mycorrhiza. It's a rhiza is a rhizome is the fungal root system basically that connects the roots to all the other roots. So what you're looking at is a gigantic collective. Yeah. Yeah. And it's in the best interest of every tree to share nutrients.
And nature ordered itself that way through the law of selection, right?
600 million years ago, there were no forests. 400 million years ago, there were forests, and they were very simple. Now look what happened. They survived 5 extinction events, including a meteor that hit the Earth and wiped out 95% of all the living things on the planet, and trees still survived. Mammals still survived. They survived all of that because of their resilience. Now that's the key. Resilience, sustainability, cooperativity. All of this needs to be brought together into our built environment. And that's the theme that I'm preaching. Espousing is a better word. I don't preach this stuff, but I have to use as an example something. So what I use is the forest, right? Forget hardwood, just the forest. It's a sharing event. Now, the sharing is not as extensive in a tropical forest as it is.
Yeah, they're much more selfish plants down there.
Yeah, a little bit, but they're much faster growing, and they want to get the sun first and all this. The northern hardwood forest doesn't have that problem.
They're more cooperative, I feel like, up
they have
north.
No seasons either in the tropics, so they're always on the growth.
Yeah.
So I want to build a city that biomimics the forest. That's basically what I want to do. So
the lessons from nature.
I would love that to be our next topic.
Yeah, okay.
Because my book about vertical farming has been out for 10 years, but the 10th anniversary edition just came out about a week ago.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And in the back of this book, I've added a chapter. And the chapter is called, And Then What Happened? And I could tell you a lot of stuff has happened in 10 years. It wasn't even there 10 years ago. And now there are vertical farms coming up where you are and everywhere else throughout the world. So
yes, absolutely.
I am thrilled. And that was the original reason why you asked me on your show, is to talk about that. But we've never actually gotten around to that, have we?
Well, thank you very much for being on. I'm going to ask you to stick around for a couple minutes after the episode ends, just to like quick final points. But thank you very much for coming on. I'll see you sometime soon on the podcast. Any last words for everyone at home for this episode?
I don't have last words. I have continuing words.
Okay. Well, have a good rest of your day. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.